The Professor Muthama told me I had 40 minutes. So if you say I have less, that is okay, but then I have to skip some slides.
No, we want more information. We want more, but or let me say we want enough.
We want enough. Yeah, that is.
I don't know what the guidelines are, but I would wish that we could see your video.
Good.
You present, oh, of course, since you'll be presenting, we'll see your slides anyway.
That is true.
That would be helpful, but all the others I can see they have muted their phone, their mics and videos.
Yes. So well, if all is well, you can see my slides now. Can you see my slide now?
Yes, it is clear.
Oh, okay. So, shall I start?
So, questions and answers. So, the floor is yours, sir.
Oh, okay. Thank you. So,
and
yes.
I just wanted to say to the rest of the audience that this is Dr. Kiemo presiding. I don't know whether that is the right word, but go ahead.
Sawa Menyakiti. So we will be discussing patrolling
yes.
of protected areas against bushmeat poachers. The required format follows more or less the thesis layout, which means that you need a lot of information to go through before you get to the results and the discussion. So the background is about 1 million of species of plants and animals are threatened with extinction because of human action, and about 60% of large mammal species are threatened with extinction because we're eating them. The main strategy to do something about this is the establishment of protected areas. Together, these protected areas, these are areas set aside for long-term conserving nature, biodiversity. Together, terrestrial protected areas form the largest country in the world with 20 million square kilometers, larger than Russia. And in Kenya, it covers 20%, 11% national parks, and 11% conservancies. Nevertheless, bushmeat poaching is a major problem in protected areas, but underestimated in Kenya, as we will see. And the problem is compounded by the fact that patrolling against poachers is expensive. So the problem statement is, what are then the factors that determine the patrolling effectiveness in these protected areas? As we will see, it is not really defined or understood. What I hope to achieve is that management and other researchers are assisted with a better understanding of the factors that determine this patrolling effectiveness. And specifically, I'm looking into the current patrolling effectiveness in the Soysambu conservancy, try to incorporate ranger expertise, and try to develop better patrolling strategies. Justification for all this is bushmeat poaching is underestimated in Kenya. We know this because there has been a task force on wildlife security in 2014, which found that KWS is not doing much about this. And as a result, there is almost no peer-reviewed research. Patrolling is always the main intervention against poaching, but it's not well understood. It can lead to the spread of zoonotic diseases. We all know about COVID-19 now, but there was also SARS, Ebola, HIV, and it enhances other forms of crime. Illegal wildlife trade is now bigger than the trade in small arms, and it grows faster than the world economy. And in the end, we're just talking about Kenyan national heritage that is in danger. The Constitution says this is our national heritage, we should conserve it. The scope of this research is one terrestrial protected area, and in particular I look at bushmeat poaching by snares. The limitation is that I'm looking at one protected area only. That was not a conscious choice. I applied for a research permit also in Tsavo. KWS didn't give the permit because they thought it was too sensitive. That is an interesting finding in itself, but out of the scope of this research. For the literature, we know that bushmeat poaching is driven by population growth in combination with a lack of spatial planning. And it is compounded by the following factors. Only 1 in 4 of the protected areas has sufficient budget to protect its wildlife. 1 in 3 of these areas is experiencing intense human pressure. Think, for example, of Lake Nakuru National Park. Half of the budget, and they don't have enough budget, but half of the budget or more goes into patrolling and law enforcement. And the people who have to patrol, 3 out of 4 of them, 75% of African rangers has been threatened by poachers. That is a mind-boggling statistic. And again, it's not really well understood. Consequences we have briefly discussed. Defaunation of landscape or the empty savanna syndrome, spread of zoonotic diseases, merging with other forms of crime, but also it becomes harder to attain SDG goals. And most frightening of all is we don't know what the consequences will be. Because never in the history of mankind has biodiversity decreased this rapidly and on this scale. We don't know what will happen. Bushmeat poaching in Kenya is severely underestimated. KWS told the Convention on Biodiversity in 2011 that they thought it was a major problem. That feeling is shared by the managers of protected areas, but nevertheless, KWS doesn't do much about it. And as a result, there were just 2 peer-reviewed articles in the last 20 years. And that means that policy development for this problem takes place in a data-free environment. You cannot develop policy if you don't have data, but that is exactly what is happening now. In terms of the research gap, as I said, we don't really understand the effectiveness of patrolling that well. We have to find the factors that increase the effectiveness of it. But also ranger input is never solicited. So what happens with researchers, they take data that are collected by rangers, they plug that into their models, but they never ask the rangers what they think. Also, poaching is a crime. In Kenya, if you sell bushmeat, you can get 3 years in prison, and if you buy it, 1 year. And nevertheless, criminology is never applied on environmental crime. And I'm especially interested in environmental criminology, which is about the context of crime. So not necessarily the same as what we think when we think about environment. The studies that were there in the last 20 years just looked at the positions of snares and compared that to the spatial terrain features. In terms of conceptual frameworks, this is a little complicated, I guess, but what I do is a hotspot analysis. Where can I find the snares? Because crime clusters is the prediction. If crime clusters, it is not random, and if it is not random, you can predict it. So what I do is desnaring transects. You walk through the savannah, you map the snares, and you compare that with spatial features like distance to park boundaries and roads and distance to settlements. But also before each desnaring transect, I ask the rangers, where do you think the snares will be? And how many snares do you think there are? And afterwards, I ask them to justify their estimate. And with that information, I could calculate the precision of their estimate with something called the diversity prediction theorem. And that theorem predicts the precision because a group of diverse people always outperforms individuals in estimations. I also looked at the patrolling effectiveness, the current patrolling effectiveness, by comparing the observation book of the conservancy, which writes down when they see poachers and how often, and the patrol plan, which is where they allocate the rangers. And I interview the rangers about the presence, where do they go, where do they patrol, how well are they able to detect poachers, and how is their morale. I also interviewed 6 communities, all the communities around Soysambu. So with that, I could compare what the expected frequency of poacher sightings was with what was actually reported. And then finally, number 3 of the specific objectives, the transect results, I used them to plug them into species distribution modeling. So I approached the positions of snares and activities of poachers just as any other species. I compare the results or validate the results with additional transects. I can then simulate a hotspot search, test that again, and I have my improved strategy. So I take a sip of tea. So here we have the Soysambu Conservancy location. It is at Lake Elementaita. It is as colonial as they come. It was established in '93 by kicking the Maasai out by the Delamares. Lord Delamere still lives there. I wanted to do my research in Savo, but I ended up here. It was okay. As you see, it is just southwest of Lake Nakuru and just northwest of Lake Naivasha. There's many environmental designations for this park. It is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, so the dark shade is the UNESCO World Heritage Core Zone, also covered as a national wildlife sanctuary. Then there's a buffer zone, the medium gray, and there's a light gray, the wetland of international importance, or the Ramsar site. At the southeast, you have the former Ututu Conservancy, and in the northwest, you have Lake Nakuru National Park. Now, what you have to know about Kenyan conservancies is that they don't exist. The legislation to register them has never been accepted. And the same goes for wetlands of international importance. And the result is that only the dark gray area is really gazetted and protected. The rest is not protected. The Ututu Conservancy has been sold, currently parceled, and will be developed as a real estate holiday homes. For the methods, the sample size, I worked with the hotspots as follows. The Conservancy estimates that there are 5. Now, these hotspots follow Poisson distribution, meaning that they have quite a big range of possible outcomes. So with a lambda of 5 and a power of 80% and a detection rate of 7 per kilometer, I calculate 80 kilometers of transects. Hotspot analysis I did with the nearest distance distribution, something called Steenan plots and Allard-Freeney set. I transposed the position of the snares with a Sentinel satellite image. These pass, I think, twice per week over Kenya. You can download these images. And I processed them as a soil-adjusted vegetation index, which I found works much better than the normalized vegetation index we normally use, and cluster that with the k-means to distinguish between different types of vegetation. And I interviewed all 6 surrounding communities. For the environmental criminology, I confirmed the following things. Crime clusters. It clusters in space. These are hotspots. It clusters around edges, like roads and boundaries. And it clusters around settlements, called something distance decay curve, which you will see later on. And it clusters in the sense that if there is a crime somewhere, there will be a crime nearby. So if you find a snare, it is likely that there is a snare nearby. If your house is burglared, it's likely that more houses will be burglared nearby. For the rangers, I calculated a sample of 30 rangers for my Likert questions or closed questions, also with a power of 80% and a moderate effect size, H 0.5. For the semi-structured questions or open questions, I calculated that I get, with 30 rangers, I will discover issues that are held by at least 10% of the rangers. And then the expertise level of the ranger was called with the diversity prediction theorem that we briefly talked about. For the interviews, I discovered with the journals that I want to be very sure that you did it in an ethical way, and therefore they expect you to follow a protocol. The protocol I followed was from the British Sociological Society. So you have to follow that and you have to mention it in your article or it will be refused. For the third objective, improve patrolling strategy, you can do two things to improve it. Improve the detection of snares. First, you can reduce the search area. That I did with the presence-only max and species distribution modeling, works with entropy. I did a validation of 40 kilometer of desnaring transacts, which I evaluated on the basis of area under curve and true-scale statistics, or the Youden statistic. And for the increased detection rate, you can increase the detection rate by visiting snares multiple times. Sorry, by visiting hotspots multiple times. And for that, I used an exploration policy called Epsilon Greedy policy, which helps you to balance your visits between sites that you know and where you know there are hotspots and sites that you don't know, which you have to explore. So that is why it is exploration. And finally, I have a simplified strategy which overlays different raster layers for distances. For the result, very soon when we started, we found poachers. This guy, for example, was part of a group of 3. Very violent guy, assaulted my colleague with a stone. KWS had to fire shots in the air. He had 200 kilo of zebra meat for the Nakuru Free Area. You have all these Choma zones there, also in Kikope. He was known by KWS. This guy was a professional. He had 2 bodas waiting. And the people living at the edge, the villagers said they go in here every day when a vuna maragwe. There is no shamba inside the conservancy. For the spatial analysis, we found that 3% of the conservancy is covered with snares. There are 16 hotspots, 325 snares. And we found them right next to ranger posts. We found them right next to lodges. For example, the Serena Lodge. We found them quite near an internal settlement. And we found that the snares are replaced as soon as you remove them. Snares are mostly placed near the roads. At the left here, you see the distance from the through roads in 500-meter increments. That is where most of them are placed. And we discovered also at the right side a new variable, which is distance to the edge of vegetation. So here I extracted the edge of the Kichaka. So you have the shaded areas. The animals like the open area because that is where they can run, that is their safety, but they seek shade in the bush, and that is also where the poachers can operate. So that was a very strong and previously unused predictor. What I also did is I did a tessellation of the area. So you have different settlements, and at the left you see how I zoned them and counted the snares. And if you set the distance from the village out against the density of the snares, you find a classical curve, at least from criminology point of view. Within 4 to 6 kilometers from the village is where you can find the snares. And this one has a small bump in the beginning, which are ground snares right next to Elementaita village. But this is a classical curve. Now the ranger opinions. When you talk with the rangers, they say poaching doesn't occur throughout the year at the same rate. It's mostly from December to March. It is not everywhere in a conservancy, but in concentrations. It's done always by groups, armed groups, and the communities know who they are, and they also know how we are. These poachers know us, but the communities don't tell us. They also told me we meet poachers sometimes. Actually, we meet them quite often, and our strategy is predictable. But we can't stop them because we're unarmed. We don't have equipment. What happens is that the rangers work from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. and therefore the poachers work from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. So basically they work in shifts. Makes them very easy. It's like a factory. Nighttime patrolling, there is just 2 vehicles. If they come, you just hide in the kichaka, the vehicle will pass, and you continue with your business. There were just 8 poacher observations from December to March. But when I calculated the expected value from what the rangers told me, I got a value that was 10 times as high. Desnared areas are snared again. Now the ranger morale was, as you might expect, not very high. They say, these poachers operate in groups and they're armed and we're not armed. We're under-equipped, we're underpaid. If we call for reinforcement, it takes a long time. And therefore, if we see poachers, it is not worth confronting them. It's too risky, but we could see them every day if you want to, but we just look the other way. Environmental governance, that was also a surprising area. There is a KWS environmental management and governance plan for the region, but the communities had never heard of it. Whereas KWS and the National Museum sent it to UNESCO, saying that the communities were involved. So I was a little bit surprised. Nobody has ever heard of it. Neither the KWS nor the conservancy management plans have any input from the community. And there are illegal developments in the protected area that includes illegal hotels, illegal construction of power lines. And none of these management plans formulate concrete actions. They talk about strengthen, coordinate, improve, enhance. None of that is actionable. In terms of the snare locations, the rangers told the snares will be found around the borders, near human settlements, and not near your offices and gates. And as I showed to you already, the snares were found near offices and gates and near roads. So it's not quite what the rangers expected. And as a result, they miss hotspots which are right under their eyes, right next to the gates that they man. In terms of their capacity to estimate snare densities, that was not good. That was not significant, although they are in the range of the minimum and maximum range. So what they have is a recency bias. They just use a rule of thumb. If they have desnared an area and they found a number of snares, they use that exact same number as an estimate. So it is sort of an anchoring effect. Now the final specific objective, improved methods. The species distribution modeling, what you see here, the shaded areas is where I think the snares would be. And the validation transacts confirmed that, so that is significant. The main variable is the vegetation edge. And it outperformed the normal search strategy, both in terms of discovering new snares and snares that were replaced. But I could also now develop a simplified search based on environmental criminology that reduces the search area much further. So as you see here, the shaded area has reduced, so the area where you search has become smaller. It misses the internal poaching here in the middle, which is done by the Soysambu staff, I think. In terms of discussion, bushmeat poaching occurs at this site at a commercial scale. These are not a few villagers. This is, as the poacher we called told us, it's for cash, and that is what also the rangers think. It is caused because we made the poachers very easy. The patrolling patterns are predictable. The rangers are intimidated by groups of poachers, and as a consequence of predictable patrolling patterns, poachers displace their activities. They go to other locations, they poach during the night, and they use snares which are hard to detect. There was an audit of the Auditor General of Kenya last year of KWS, and KWS told the Auditor General that 90% of poaching in Kenya occurs during the night, but that nobody has really the night vision equipment to detect it. Patrols miss the snaring hotspots, and rangers do not patrol poacher sightings. And now, as a result, if a protected area tells you that there is not a lot of poaching, it can mean the exact opposite. It means the exact opposite because there is a lot of poaching, but the poachers displace their activities and the rangers don't report the sightings. So all that is filtered before it gets into the observation book of the conservancy. The application of environmental criminology and all these hotspot types could be confirmed, could reduce the search area. Polling effectiveness can be improved, but the effect size is small. What you have to do is you have to search the surroundings of snares that you find. You can randomize your search strategy, but it's not a standalone strategy. You need KWS, you need the local governmental organizations. Problem of those environmental governance of the regional scale is that it is not there. It is there on paper. The UNESCO management plan dates from 10 years ago. It was not implemented. It was not gazetted. Communities were not involved. Conservancy doesn't do much. They supply water to Elementaita village. But nobody has ever heard of the management plan. Nobody was ever compensated for wildlife damage. And the authorities look the other way when there are illegal developments. So during a Ramsar moratorium, a power transmission line was constructed right through the Ramsar site. Ututu Conservancy and Wildlife Corridor was lost to real estate developers. Ramsar site was never gazetted. So it all exists, people, but only on paper. The factors that influence bushmeat poaching on the conservancy level is guardianship. And guardianship is the cumulative product of ranger presence. There is somebody there to detect, their capacity to detect, and their intervention capability. If there's nobody to detect, you won't find anything. And if you won't find anything, you cannot intervene. If one of these factors is zero, everything is zero. But it's offset by counter strategies from poachers. Poachers know the strategies and they can take action on it. They can see when there are patrols and they can just choose a different time to poach or a different place. They call rangers to treat with threats. And that is why the ranger morale is very low in combination with the information leakage. Recommendations. I think this UNESCO World Heritage Site belongs on the UNESCO World Heritage List in danger. This site is not managed. There are illegal things happening, not just poaching, but also large-scale hotel developments, real estate developments, and power line construction. Further research is, and that is for other people, is why are management and strategic plans in this region not implemented? Why does it only exist on paper? Why are there no data? Why are these plans only developed on the basis of guesses and opinions? And also, the population in this region doubles every 20 years. It grows faster than the national average. And that means that if you have a management plan of 10 years, your population has grown by 50% and it changes everything already. But there's no flexibility in those management plans. For protected areas and researchers is don't use data without knowing where it comes from. But that is exactly what is happening now. It is very likely that the data has a lot of filtering, that it doesn't contain all the cases, or maybe just a fraction of the cases. You have to check it, and you should check it especially along the edges. So that means that if you do research in a protected area, a lot of poaching is not just at the boundaries, but just over it. So don't limit it to the area itself. If you find poaching sites that are fresh, then it is likely that there's more poaching in the direct surroundings and that people will come back to poach more. This is something we discussed. Reduced poaching may indicate the opposite. Contribution to science. What I hope to have achieved is that environmental criminology can and should be applied on environmental crime, and so far it hasn't been done. Data from protected areas are subject to survivorship bias. Data are filtered before they reach the database or the observation book of the protected area. Rangers are subject to recency bias. So if they estimate something, if they decide where to go, they just use the results of the previous operations. Desnaring is not a standalone strategy. That is what the conservancy is doing now. You should work together with other parts of the government. So here are all the references. If you want to go through it, everything is there. So I hope I have stayed within the time that I had available. Back to the Wanyakiti.
Thank you very much, Henk, for that presentation. Thank you for staying within the time. I noted that I had made a mistake to give you up to several minutes after 3, but it was several minutes to 3.
No problem.
Now the time is 2:36. You were to go up to 2:45. You have given us some extra minute.
That
should translate to something useful.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to say to all the audience that the purpose of this meeting is once that we have listened to Henk's presentation, we can give feedback that he can use to further strengthen the paper, as well as we digest what he has said and comment either conceptually or issues of methodology. And Mr. Henk, let me ask, do you have somebody to take notes for you?
No, but I think I can do it.
You can, but I can also appoint one for you. I can see your friend Stephen Tirop there.
Yes, and somebody who's really good at it, but I don't know if she wants it, is Mutono.
Mutona. All right, yeah.
Is she around?
Mutona. Is that Rhoda?
Yes, I'm around.
Yeah, Rhoda. Henk is kindly asking you to take notes for him so that at the end of it all, you can give some feedback. I know one can take their own notes, but again, it doesn't harm to have somebody else help you with the note taking. I also noticed that our discussant, Dr. John Githaiga, is in the house. And yeah, thank you, Dr. Githaiga. I now welcome him to give his opinion about the paper that Henk has presented. Welcome, Dr. Githaiga. Unmute your mic, Dr. Githaiga. Thank you.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Are we communicating?
Sure, you are on.
Yes, I've gone through the paper. It is impressive. I like the topic, especially in the area where he has undertaken it, because in that area, bushmeat is the biggest sinkhole for our wildlife. I do appreciate the difficulties he had in data collection, because for one, we have the community where the poachers belong, and therefore getting information can be difficult. We are well aware of recent history in that area, and therefore the issue of poaching and bushmeat is very emotive, just not to the community, but also to the people in the conservation area, KWS, Soysambu, and the others. Again, I do appreciate the difficulties we would have in getting the data from KWS, because there's that culture of secrecy, and there's also that kind of mistrust of anybody, especially somebody coming from outside the system, which I believe is also within the system. And the work is very informative, very well written, and I believe he did look at the issues that are pertinent to poaching. Just a few things here. One thing that could have come out very well is the profiling of the poachers. Who are they? Why do they do what they are doing? What are the drivers that drive them into doing this? That profiling and the attitude they have towards wildlife. Is it somebody else's issue? Is it a problem to them? How do they see it? Where do they come from? How have they been brought up? Do they have an issue with society and the landowners and that kind of thing? That could have informed the issue further. The other one is about the markets. Yes, there are the formal markets in places like Kikopey. You have the formal markets in Kasarani, and you also have the other market in Nakuru, and also the internal community market. Even though it would have been possible to trace the chain from the bush to the table, that would have also helped in really getting about the something about the drivers and what really makes this bushmeat trade profitable. Profile of the consumers, profile of the actors, the poachers themselves. I do know there was work done in that area by IFO on the bushmeat trade. Dr. Shira, my colleague, did it, and it would have been good if we had access to the report from IFO in Nairobi on what the findings were. The other issue is about the distribution of the hot points against the communities where they come from. There is Kiongororia, there is Baruk, there is Kiwajadege, and the other settlements by the people who came from Utut. If it was possible to get a poverty profile and see what are the socioeconomics and what should make these people really amenable to being participants in the bushmeat trade, that would have been of some assistance. I do see he had to engage the herders. Yes, they come from the communities, they interact with the communities, so they should fear giving information about the poachers. But if there was a way in looking at the poachers, plus they are linked criminal networks that revolve around charcoal burning, the extraction of precious would the plant resources, that would have helped. But and we do appreciate the difficulty of penetrating those networks. They are criminal enterprises, and they should really guard against giving information to others elsewhere. The other thing was to look at the hotspots of the poaching, and some of it is looking like it's linked to the hotels at Bweha Camp, at Selena, and also other places. Is it possible that the people within these areas are also contributors to the problem? If there's a way of finding out that, that would make it a bit more unleashed. The other point is about the distribution of the wildlife against the poaching hotspots. If we know the species that they are going for, what are being preferred, is it market driven or is it driven by the ease of access? That could have helped. I don't believe there should be maps in Soysambu showing the distribution of the different species, the elands, the giraffes, and all that. And that offering could be of use and help the paper become better. It's not bad, it's quite good. It's a new contribution. But those are new areas that can be gotten into. If the information is available, probably the candidate can be able to see whether they can be able to access it. The only other question I had was on one of the correlates about the communities living around there. We do know that once you mention communities by names, there's a problem. But here in Kenya, the community identity and the issue of taking up bushmeat is evident and obvious. If we can be able to go around it in a subtle way, that may help us to know who really is doing what, given that you have different ethnic communities in that area. Look at the intensity of offtake and see whether you can be able to plug into any community.
Yeah, not already there. Not already there.
So that you can be able to have an approach that can target the community leadership to see whether there's a way in which this can be brought down a bit. The other issue is to look at the wider wildlife corridor between Nakuru and Naivasha. There are issues, yes, because people have settled in the areas. But if you can be able to correlate the hotspots to the migratory corridors that have been mapped, then that information would be very useful to conservation and also to attempts to ensure that the wildlife survives in that area. Overall, I would say this is a study that should have been done 10 years ago. It was as urgent as yesterday and should be really received by all stakeholders with a lot of enthusiasm, and also its applicability is quite high. And I do like the way he has applied criminal theory to a real criminal problem that's really robbing us of our wildlife. I think that's the much I can say in the time that we have. Chairman.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Githaiga. I wish I had a bio sketch of Dr. Githaiga to introduce him, but I wanted to say I think I have met him somewhere. I know he is a guru in environmental impact assessment. I know his interest, I know his knowledge about wildlife, and informally, I can say he is the right person to do this job. And as you have heard, he has given us an outline of his assessment of the presentation from Henk. And with that now, I thank you, Dr. Githaiga, and I invite members in the audience to give their comments and to ask questions to the presenter, Mr. Henk. I don't know if I may be guided, whether it should be random, that anybody can ask a question, and I think that could be the way. Let me suggest this. Let us start with professors at WMI to make their contributions or their assessments of the paper. I know we have Professor Mudama in the room. We have Professor Mugai in the room. Let's hear them open up the discussion so that we can then bring it to others.
I think, Dr. Kemo, you can open up the discussion to the floor. Myself, I'll speak, I think, towards the end. Professor Mudama is a, I don't know whether he would like to, perhaps he would like to listen to what other people may wish to raise. But of course, he's free to.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Mungai. I agree with you. Dr. Kiemo, I would request that I could comment later after the audience comments and raises questions. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, that is fine. As the audience thinks about what questions to ask, I could ask or make some comments, and maybe, yeah, I think it is general comments. One, I think it is a very good study. It is new. It is a brief attempt to combine criminology theory to environmental problems. I think that's a good way, which goes on to strengthen Wangari Maathai's approach of multidisciplinarity. So thank you, Henk, for that. Some comments have been raised about some gaps which you may consider that may enrich your paper from the discussant. Together with that, let me make 2 points. One, what were the positives? That would be my question, because you are looking at the effectiveness of patrolling, and what comes out is like 100% indictment of the rangers, that they are up to no good, that they don't succeed, that the patrolling is as if has nothing. Then one would ask, if they are so weak, if they are intimidated, like you said, how come the conservancy is still alive? If the poachers have a free day, how come the conservancy is still there? So what are the parts of effectiveness? Because from your presentation, and I don't know whether I missed anything, it is as if the effectiveness is zero. It is wanting. So what were the positives? What is the role of technology in any positive element there could be? What is the role of community? Do we have some community members who tell the rangers or KWS, or they communicate something to them? Does KWS work with community, either through some organizations or through some individuals? I think that positivity element is lacking. The other thing I would have wanted to hear is about the thread. I would want to know, if you look at time, within a spread of time, what is the prevalence of poaching in terms of maybe not only A, but maybe not A and any other, but in terms of the numbers of animals that are poached? Can we be able to see that in 2010, this is the amount of animals that were poached? in 2015, in 2020. That is, we can be able to trace it over time. How is the trend? Is it a worsening trend, or how is it working? I think that could have helped us to understand better. And then I know you are looking at the effectiveness of patrolling. So your key thing is patrolling. This is the patrolling. You have mentioned something about it, but then I don't know whether I missed it, but I see us moving away and further away from the effectiveness of patrolling to now the weaknesses of poor patrolling, where now we see the problem, much more the problem than the effectiveness. And I don't know whether I'm communicating. If you are to give the patrolling a score between 1 and 10, where is the mark? And how do we explain that mark? If it is 50%, what is the 50, the good 50 and the bad 50? But also, if you are looking at the bad portion, you could tell us more about the networks. Given that you have gone into the social sciences and built something from it, and that is good, how are the criminal networks? What is their connection with the rangers? Because we see one guy being grabbed, but is it because there were other observers? What about when there were no observers? How is the criminal network? I think that would have added more voice to this approach of looking at the negative element in the patrolling. Thanks, but we listen to others. Please, I can't see the icon for raising one's hand, but I think, I don't know. The host, how would we go about this?
There are a few questions and comments in the chat, Dr. Kemo. You may wish to draw the attention to Henk.
Okay, all right. I can see within the chat. Yeah, this will help to see. Are the poachers using any baits to lure the animals? Are there specific species that are targeted than others? Mitigation of poaching is a good idea. Which animal species are the main target? That has been asked twice. Judy Kimaru says she has a question to ask. Did Henk get any information from kenyalaw.org? For example, about prosecutions. I think let me take that one first. Henk, did you check data to see whether there have been any prosecutions, any arrests? The numbers, of course, we saw one arrest. What are the numbers? If you could comment on that, I think that would be a good starting point.
Yes, I looked at those numbers. I looked at Kenya annual reports, and there are also reports on Wildlife Direct, who traces arrests of poachers all the way to their conviction or to their acquittal. And these numbers are not quite high, and they're about 50-50 between trophy hunting, so hunting for animal parts like tusks or rhino horns, and bushmeat poachers. So I've used that information.
Okay, fair enough. Then I see this question, what is the place of indigenous knowledge in effective patrols? Did you see anything like that? Do you have a place of it in your study?
I used the knowledge of the rangers. So I found out that nobody ever asked the rangers their opinions, and what they discover when they walk around the whole day is has been invaluable for me during these 120 kilometers that I walked around with them. They pointed out things that I would never have found out. For example, that these that these snares are never placed inside the bush itself, but along the edges, and why that is the case, and how you read the landscape. The indigenous knowledge, well, it is of course a ranch that is used as such in a conservancy. So you have people from the villages working in there, but indigenous knowledge would be how they would set the traps, for example. And I've tried anything to talk with poachers or ex-poachers. But since you can get a 3 years prison sentence for this, they were not very keen.
Mm. Yeah, I understand that, because the question about indigenous knowledge would be more relevant had we been looking at the community role in patrolling. I think you have mentioned that you looked at the rangers, that is from the institutional point of view. But
yes.
Comment on the weakness of the institution. Why? You mentioned that they are not armed. I thought KWS are always armed.
There is, you have KWS and you have the rangers from Soysambu itself. So KWS has a station in Kikope, and they are in Lake Nakuru, and they are armed. But the conservancy itself, like other conservancies, employ their own rangers, and those are not armed. And this conservancy has a very bad history with violence, because the son of De La Mare, who died, shot 2 people. He shot a KWS ranger in civilian, and he shot a poacher. And he ended up in Kamiti. And if you talk about arms in Soysambu, they immediately say, no, 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 never. But KWS can always come to the conservancy and help the rangers there. But the problem is that they don't have money. You have to pay for the diesel and everything and for the lunch, otherwise they won't come.
Mm-hmm. Just another more or less just a comment on a simple question is there any way of finding out whether the poachers think of themselves as hunters more than poachers?
I've tried to talk with them, but there are different complications. The first is if I show up at the communities, what they see is that somebody from outside. You know, they say there's a Mlami, and they don't trust it. The rangers trust me. They tell me all sorts of things. But the communities, they know very well, and that is the reason why it has not gotten completely out of hand, is that when you are caught, the picture of the guy you saw, he's still in prison. It is a serious offense to buy bushmeat or to sell bushmeat. So why should you cooperate? That is the question. What do you gain in telling me what you know about the poachers? That is the problem that I had. I've tried at several occasions to come into contact with them, but nobody is very keen.
Mm-hmm. Very well. Jude, we could take your question.
Thank you, Dr. Ari, and thank you for the presentation. It was very informative. My question is around follow the money. Did you find out any relationship between the global wildlife trade and the consumption of bushmeat? Specifically, is all this meat for consumption? Is it consumed? Is it national or does it cross borders? And how does it positively or negatively correlate with illegal wildlife trade that has a more wider reach, goes to other continents, and so on and so forth? So I just wanted to know that correlation. Thank you.
Yeah, that is a very good question. I think I've tried to read everything about bushmeat that I could find. There is international trade, but it is very shady business. Of course, it is illegal. I have the feeling that KWS knows a little bit more. They say, for example, if they close bushmeat operations in Nairobi, they find back meat from Soysambu. But the problem with KWS, as Dr. Kitaiga said, is they are very secretive. They don't trust anybody, and that includes researchers from the University of Nairobi with a research permit. So that sort of information has never been put on the table, including not by the Task Force on Wildlife Security and including not on several working groups on bushmeat poaching in Kenya. So it would be a large-scale operation with the police and KWS to find out more about this. I cannot really do this. I can't see how I could find that information. But I would be very interested, obviously.
Thank you very much for that response. Somebody, Jane Murugi, asks, you said KWS work 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. They go to sleep and the poachers go to work.
Mm-hmm.
What is this kind of arrangement? Is it structured? Why don't they patrol at night?
It is a question that was also asked by the Auditor General of Kenya, Mr. Auko. The thing is, if you go out with rangers at night, you have to distinguish between KWS rangers and the Soysambu rangers, because the KWS rangers are armed. They can go out at night. I think in the conservancies or in the national parks where they have rhinos and elephants, they have night vision goggles, but not enough of them, very little. And they told the Auditor General that 90% of the poaching occurred during the night because there are less rangers and it is harder to detect the poacher. So it is just, you observe patrolling patterns and you react accordingly. And I've seen it a few times also in other conservancies. For the Soysambu rangers, I went out at night with them because I have infrared night vision equipment, and I've never seen people so terrified. They feared for their lives.
Mm-hmm. Could you comment on the question that I had asked earlier? If the Soysambu rangers are not armed, then what does patrol constitute? And what mark would you give them between 1 and 10? So that we can see whether there is any element that can be enhanced, or is it 0?
It is not 0 because, as you rightly said, there are also positives. They know it is, these poachers know it is illegal. If you have an example like we caught one guy, he's still in prison. The problem is you don't have a counterfactual. So to assess the effect of these patrols, you would have to experiment with 0 patrolling and see what the poaching would be in that case. That is one difficulty. And the other difficulty is that you don't see really animals decrease. You see animals decreasing, but they also flow in from outside the conservancy. It's not a closed system. But they're surprisingly motivated because I asked each of them, what would you do if you would be in charge? How would you reorganize all this? And each one of them came up with an answer right away. So they had thought about that. And you only do that when you're motivated. So I think many of the individual rangers, I would give them a 7, and there are some of them I don't trust. I think there are some bad apples between them, but the majority is quite motivated. And that keeps the conservancy from collapsing. But it's not exact science.
All right. Somebody asks, what informed your change of study area from Sabo to Soysambu?
That is a very interesting one. I went to KWS at the time when I was working on my proposal, and I discussed with Dr. Kasiki. And Dr. Kasiki at the time was the Deputy for Research and Wildlife Security. And Dr. Kasiki was enthusiastic. He said, this is a good idea. It should have been done before. That was the first time I talked with him. The second time I talked with him, he said, but we're not giving you a research permit because my boss thinks it is too sensitive. And I never could discuss it further with him because he got sidetracked because of the 10 rhinos that died after they were placed in different protected areas. The impression that I have of KWS is that they're constantly hiding things. I've also tried to work in Bogoria. They didn't want to show me the observation book. I've tried to work in Voi with Wildlife Direct, a private organization with 10 years of patrolling data, and KWS blocked my access to it. I respect KWS rangers a lot. They have even saved my life once when I was attacked by a buffalo. But as an organization, I don't trust them.
I hear you.
Could I follow that a little bit? Henk, do you have Nakosti letter?
Sorry, do I have? Your line is not good.
You know Nakosti?
Yeah, I have the Nakosti permit.
Aha, that's good.
Yeah,
Okay.
I have the Nakosti. And that was also what I told KWS. And afterwards, I discussed it with Dr. Lacey Lau at KWS. And I said to him, it is very strange. I never see KWS data. And when there is peer-reviewed research, it is always from KWS staff who has received a scholarship in one of the universities abroad, including the universities in my country.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a very strange situation. There is KWS staff who studies at the university of my hometown. They have access to data, and much better access to data than I have as an Mzungu here at the University of Nairobi. That really surprises me. Actually, I'm quite shocked by it.
Maybe Dr. Kemo, I can make a comment or two. Thanks, Henk.
Mm-hmm.
I faced a similar problem when we were doing some work for KWS, the Rhino Arc, UNEP,
Mm-hmm.
when we were trying to assess the impact of the electrified fence.
Mm-hmm.
And we asked for data on the human-wildlife conflicts around the Aberdare ecosystem,
Mm-hmm.
and we couldn't get that data.
Mm-hmm.
So it seems to be a common problem.
Yes.
I find your work very interesting. You've done it extremely well. I have seen a lot of governance issues, which you have highlighted. You may not be calling them governance issues,
Mm-hmm.
but certainly they are there because you've looked at institutions, you have looked at policies, you have looked at actions by different stakeholders. I'm not sure whether you may not wish to consider your title. Presently, it is effective patrolling of protected areas, but you may wish to consider whether you may not put it as evaluating effective patrolling of protected areas or something like that. What it is that you went out to do. Now,
Yes.
the second comment I have is, I saw the photo of the arrested poacher who is half naked. You may wish to look at the policy, what do you call it? The ethical research ethics, the policy of the University of Nairobi. That may apply to more than just that particular photo, so that if there is an area where you need to be a little bit moderate, you take that into account.
So.
The third comment is more of a comment, or rather question is, I don't think it came out clearly to me through your presentation, but what would you say is your contribution to policy with respect to the management of protected areas, in Kenya, based on this study that you did? What would be your recommendation to the institutions? Because there are several institutions you mentioned which are involved. What is your recommendation from this study? What is your recommendation on the enforcement of applicable policies and laws with respect to protected areas? Now, finally, although I think you mentioned in one of the answers you gave, is your study area a unique one? Or can your results be generalized to other protected areas? Thank you. Maybe you can comment on some of those things.
Yes, of course, of course. Title, yeah, that is a good idea. Evaluate. I've not decided on a title yet, so that is a good moment. Arrested poacher. I've of course selected a picture where the man is not recognizable, so it's taken from the back. But yeah, it's certainly important ethical considerations. The institutions, the recommendations is well. What I found is that if you develop policies, you have to know what you're talking about. You have to make an analysis, and the analysis has to be made on the basis of data. And that is not being done. And the second thing is, if the population grows this fast, if you acknowledge that problem, you have to build flexibility in your management plans. Otherwise, they will outdate under your feet. During a normal management plan period, the population grows so much that the context changes.
Sure.
And the other, what has really baffled me is that you have lots of strategic plans in Kenya, but you have no monitoring and evaluation, and therefore you cannot learn. So you can download these strategic plans by the gigabyte in colorful designed forms, but you never find anything about, well, did it work? Was it gazetted? What sort of problems did we find? What did we learn from it? And also the targets, objectives are not formulated in such a way that they're operational. And therefore they're doomed from the start. If you see one of these plans, you see that there's no reference to any peer-reviewed articles, that you see that there is no objective that has been made operational and quantified and budgeted. And if you look at the analysis, which is just to say we need more patrolling and not is there some problem with the communities or whatever, then there's a lot of work to be done in the institutional part of it. I mean, I think that is a complete PhD project on its own. Only one protected area, I know that limitation, and therefore I've put a lot of effort in my thesis to link to other literature which says we have the same background, we have the same type of problems here. Like, for example, 3/4 of African rangers have been intimidated by poachers, and therefore it is likely that in other protected areas, not all poacher sightings are reported. And the Auditor General of Kenya said poaching occurs during the night when there are no patrols. So I think this is a very general problem in Kenya.
Okay, that's pretty good. I haven't read your thesis, so if they come out as well as you have explained, I think that would be wonderful.
Thank you, Professor Mugai. There are a few other questions I see on the chat, like someone is asking, do we have the number of animals and their species, and especially those that are mostly poached? Do you have that data that we can know what kind of losses are there?
Yes, I have the data. So there is every 6 months, there is a census, and the census takes place in blocks within the conservancy. So you know every half year about how many animals are where in the conservancy. So that information is available. The difficulty is to link it with poaching. Because, for example, well, first of all, if you put a snare, anything can walk into it. So they target impalas, gazelles, and zebras, but anything walks into it, including the buffaloes, giraffes, hyenas, you name it. And about 1/3 of the animals that is trapped escapes or is eaten by predators somewhere else. So it's very difficult to link that. And the conservancy is on, or was on, a corridor. So there are many animals coming in from outside into the conservancy, probably also because their habitat is destroyed outside. And so they're looking for food and water and safety in the conservancy, because elsewhere it is now all being converted into shambas. So you have too many unknowns to make that calculation.
All right. Yes, Lillian Kogani wants to ask a point of clarification. Go ahead, Lillian.
Hank, thank you so much for your presentation, and the findings are quite insightful. And yes, interesting. Though of course, it's a sensitive topic, but we still need the data. So, in terms of maybe following up on the accessibility, I appreciate the challenges that you had, maybe in terms of access to information, both from maybe KWS and also penetrating the community. Do you think that probably then the results, maybe you can say that the results may be some kind of biasness, or then in terms of, while I appreciate the community also may have a very important role to play in the conservation, and maybe access the information from the community might have been a bit a challenge because of being quote in quotes, did you attempt to use maybe the key research assistant to enable you penetrate the community and also get some information from them? And if not, do you think that maybe if it had been done the other way around, the research, the findings would be more or something?
Mm-hmm. So I've talked with the representatives from the community, and in this case, because the ranch is so old, it is 100 years old, the communities and the ranch are a little bit interwoven. So people work at that farm and they live in the community next to it for quite a long time. And so I'm not sure if they would have given me any more information than they have given me now. I mean, there is a link with human-wildlife conflict, as people call it. They say their attitude, and of course I have not been able to present all the information that I have collected because I had 40 minutes or less. But what the communities told me is to say, we are not really interested in wildlife because it only gives damage and we are never compensated. We just want an electric fence. And if these animals come, we see it as the animals from Soysambu. They don't see it as their heritage. They don't see it as Kenyan animals. They've never been compensated. So they fill in the forms, they're never compensated. And therefore they sort of subtly let me know that if these animals come anyway, they will just kill them. So that is one aspect. And the other interesting aspect, which I found, is their very recent research from last year that came to the really startling conclusion that community development projects are always proposed as an intervention. But nobody knows whether it works because almost none of them has ever been monitored. So imagine Now, years and years of community development projects to discuss this problem has not led to a conclusive result. So I'm not sure how I would come to a conclusive result here.
Thanks a lot. There is a question by Joyce Emankar, and she asked something about a hefty fine for poaching, which was introduced in a 2013 law. And she is asking whether this has any impact. And I wanted to ask the same question in a different way. Does arrest help?
Yeah, well, the law has been changed. The 2013 law has been changed in the sense that fines for sales of bushmeat has been converted into an unconditional prison sentence, because bushmeat poachers would just pay the fine and walk out. So I think it was in 2017 that it has changed into 3 years of prison. And if you buy bushmeat, it's 1 year of prison. And in that sense, of course, people are afraid of arrest, because the least thing that will happen is that you have to bribe the police or who else to walk out. And the poacher that we arrested is still in prison. So I think arrest helps. But the difficulty is, how do you ever get to arrest? If they evade your patrols, and if they intimidate your rangers, you will never get to the point in which you detect them and are able to arrest them. Once you arrest them, the whole thing becomes expensive for them, of course, either as a fine, as a prison sentence, or as a bribe.
Thank you. Somebody asks, is there seasonality of poaching?
Sure. The high season is from December to March. It is related, according to the rangers, to the festive period, Christmas, New Year, and also to the payment of school fees. So it is exactly around the period in which I did most of my research. That was the high season. It doesn't mean that there's no poaching in other months, but December to March is the high season.
Right. How do I think that, and I could be wrong, that we are struggling between two different topics. One, and you can guide me, it might help me, and also if it makes sense, it might help you, that we have one question on the nature of crime, which goes very well with the descriptions that you made about the hotspots, the distance to the roads, and so on and so on. That is the crime mapping part. I think that is quite very interesting. And then you have another topic or another subject, which is the management part of the whole thing. Your title suggests that we should be looking more at the patrolling element. But as we ask these questions, as the audience is reflecting on it, and as we discuss, it seems like we are leaning more towards the nature of crime, the seasonality, the methods, the animals at risk, and so on and so on, and less on your key topic, which is the management part. And I am wondering if there was a manager of Soysambu in the audience, would he or she say we have done justice to examination of the management of the conservancy? Because patrolling is a management issue.
Well, of course, I worked together with the management, and the article that I submitted for publication on this, I first showed it to the management and said, what do you think of this? And actually many things came as a surprise to them. For example, that poaching takes place right next to ranger posts, or right next to a lodge, or right next to an internal settlement. There are many things that are unknown between the rangers and the management. And there is some sort of an unspoken agreement between poachers and rangers to leave each other alone. That is part of the problem. So the divergence in topics that you see is that you have a very secretive world which takes place in the social sphere, the communities, the silent agreement with the rangers, not reporting all these things. And then the manifestation of the poachers, of the poaching, which can be mapped and tested and modeled because you have a spatial position of a snare which you can compare to other spatial features. So what I'm trying to do is I work back from what I can measure to what I cannot measure. So all these things that people are interested in here are soft. You cannot make it hard. You cannot say, these people are involved in poaching. These supervisors of the rangers are involved in poaching. You can only suspect it. But what you can do is to say, if I map this, I calculate 10 times more manifestation of poaching than I see in your observation book. So apparently there's something wrong here. That is how I have approached it.
Okay. And I don't see any questions, any other question that I have not mentioned from the chat. I can see people commenting the presentation. Great effort is noted. There are some kudos, and of course you can see the chat yourself later.
Yeah, I'm looking at it.
Nuno Abdi.
Yes, Daktari.
Yes.
Good afternoon. I have a question to Henk.
Go ahead.
Yes, good afternoon, Henk. Thanks for the unique and very relevant study, especially at a time when environmental criminology is getting track across the globe. You focused more on the poachers, and my interest is on the environmental criminology aspect, which I see you did not discuss much from, and a lot of questions did not come from that aspect. And in the sense that in 2018, maybe we could be aware, in 2018, Kenya made to the list of the Global Witness, which is an international body that documents killing and harassments of environmental and land rights defenders across the world. So in 2018, Kenya made to that list. So maybe as you are doing your research, did you find throughout the history of Soysambu, if there have been cases of environmental and the protected area sanctuary, people who have been advocating for conservation, whether local communities or rangers that have been killed?
That's a good question. I've asked every ranger whether they experienced any violence, either from poachers or from the communities. So there's some guys with panga wounds on their head. There are guys who had their house set underwater. There are guys who got equipment stolen or their piki stolen. So the life of the rangers is not very easy because they also live within those communities, and they are convinced that the communities know, and they don't tell them. The difficulties with these communities is also that they're very mixed. There's a lot of newcomers. It's an immigration area. It is not one tribe or something. It's very mixed. And of course, the whole area, and that is what always has given me a slight feeling of unease. As I said during my presentation, the whole ranch is as colonial as it gets. It has been established by kicking out the Maasai. And every time when there are problems with that ranch, for example, when the son of Delamere shot 2 people, then the land issue comes up. then you have politicians saying, yeah, these people, these Wazungu here, they have a lot of land. And there's even people, they say, politicians who say, if you vote for me, you get an acre of Delamere. Oh, there's a lot of pressure on the land there. And the communities, they grow so fast that they change by the year. If you compare satellite images and census, then you can't really talk about communities. You have to talk about the communities of this year compared to 10 years ago, compared to 10 years before that. That's how fast it changes. Over.
Hello?
Yes. Dr. Kiemo?
Yeah, yes.
Yes, thank you. Sorry, my mic was muted. Thank you, Abdi. Then I see another question. Somebody is asking, what is your perspective on public participation as an element of governance? How does it affect patrolling of the area? Did you say that there is no such a management plan between the conservancy and the community? You could respond to that.
So the conservancy has a management plan. The management plan doesn't have really any visible community input or a plan. What they do is they help the communities with some things like provision of water, sanitation posts or health posts, and they're helping them now with the COVID-19 issue. Then on a regional level, because there's so many environmental designations, you have Ramsar and UNESCO and what have you, there's also a management plan by the National Museums of Kenya and KWS, which has been sent to UNESCO, but it has never been gazetted. And that management plan emphasizes the importance of community participation, and I would fully agree with them. But the problem is that it has never happened. I asked these communities about that plan, and nobody knew about it, but everybody had ideas about it. But these ideas were never solicited. And as I said during my presentation, I was shocked about it. Because what has basically happened is that UNESCO has received a management plan which claims public participation, whereas the evidence of that participation is totally missing. And I think it's a recipe for disaster. And apart from that, they are not allowed to gazette the management plan without that participation. It would be illegal. So the situation is very clear. It is anchored in Kenyan law, and they didn't comply with it.
I think, Henk, there is a comment which was made by the discussion, which I think is very important. And that is information about the profile of the demographic profile of the poachers and the people who are living there. Because that may pinpoint what he was calling the drivers, but also whether there will be peace in that area now and into the future. Because there will be a fight between the owners of the conservancy and the people, the communities which are living there, who I presume, I think they must be fairly poor people. And so a system that manages to assist the local communities in one way or the other so that they can improve their livelihoods, I think would be good for sustainability of the ecosystem. I don't know what your comment would be.
I think you're very right, Professor. There is a sort of an inherent conflict between those communities and the conservancy. But the analysis in the management plan is missing, because the classic approach is to say we have to help them, we have to share benefits. That is also that you can find in the Kenyan Wildlife Conservancy and Management Act. But the fact that these communities grow means that there is a bigger pool of bushmeat poachers. And these are people between 25 and 45 years, always men, always looking for cash, according to the rangers. And so those growing communities undermine the resource basis from which they need to share. So the total cake becomes smaller and the slices of the cake become thinner, because there are more people over which you have to distribute your revenue or your benefits from wildlife tourism. And that is a problem that has I've never seen it addressed anywhere. Like your management plan is outdated in a few years because the population grows with about 3% per year. It undermines the resource base and you have to divide it over more people. It has never been addressed, that problem. So it is, in my view, it is too easy to say you have to share with the communities, because there is no sustainable model for it yet. And as I said with the previous question, there is really a very important meta-research which came out last year, which demonstrated that these community development projects, that their beneficial effect has never been proven because it has never been really monitored. I mean, that is for the Wangari Maathai Institute quite something.
Yeah. So, what does your research tell us about the sustainability of that socio-ecological system?
I estimate that if it is not placed on, I don't think the Kenyan authorities are capable of dealing with it. And I don't say that because I'm pessimistic, but because I look at the evidence on the ground. If it is not placed on the UNESCO list in danger, I give it about 10 years for it will disappear. Because the same thing happens now as is happening in Lake Nakuru, is it is completely fenced. The corridor is closed. The corridor will be developed with real estate housing. That means that the animals cannot move. You will get inbreeding with the continuous poaching. The communities become bigger. The Delamares are still living there. They're very old and their son has died. So I mean, I don't. It won't be there in 10 years if we go on like this.
What is the solution, Henk?
The solution is that if you develop a policy to deal with this, you need to work together as with the authorities. And authorities have to make a diagnosis, and that diagnosis is not yet made. The only thing they say is we need more arrests and more patrolling. And the diagnosis is also not made because there is no data on this. There is no research, and I've explained this afternoon how KWS is not very collaborative in this. So if you don't collect data, if you don't make a diagnosis, and if you don't do what you promise in your strategic plan, you might as well not do it. Once you start doing that, you can see what the prognosis will be.
Yep. Thank you.
Maybe Dr. Kemo, could I, at this point, maybe comment?
Sure, Professor Mudama.
Yeah. Thank you, Henk, for the presentation. Very elaborate. And I would also like to thank Dr. Githaiga for the very useful comments. And I recognize, of course, my fellow supervisors, Dr. Wangondu, Dr. Mbao. I thought I saw Dr. Wangondu earlier on. Maybe she's still in. Maybe I want to hear from you, Henk, one of the issues, especially the nighttime challenge. What would be your thoughts about the use of technology? Because this cuts across not only in Kenya, but elsewhere. how would technology support or replace patrolling? With the aim of enhancing the efforts of conservation.
It will help. It functions as an amplifier. So if you have, for example, night vision equipment, what it does in fact is it increases your presence and it increases your detection capability. What it still doesn't solve is what you do once you have detected poachers. So for example, everybody's now talking about drones. So you can fly over an area and you can detect poachers. And now the question is, what do you do if you detect them? If it is a group of armed poachers, then I can predict that nothing will happen from what I've seen, because the rangers of Soysambu are unarmed and outnumbered, and they feel underpaid, and they will not try to stop these poachers. But of course, if you have nighttime vision, then it becomes much easier to find the poachers. But you must have a plan and preparation for what you do once you find them, because you can get killed. I mean, the encounter that we had with that poacher, which you saw the picture, was very violent. And lucky KWS was there with guns, because he took a big stone and he was about to smash the head of my colleague.
Okay, thank you.
Dr. Kemo, you are still in the meeting? Dr. Kemo.
Is he on mute?
Any more questions?
Hello, sorry, my network somehow disappeared along the way. That's a technological challenge. I don't know what I missed, but I left Mr. Henk responding to Professor Mudhama's query.
We were talking about technology when you were experiencing technological problems.
Yes.
Yeah, I could come in at that, and I think for you to give a lot of to give more weight on the patrolling element, the role of technology, whether the technology is hardware like fencing or whatever, and the techniques, including the use of gadgets, whatever there could be. I think a discussion about that, what they are using and what they should use. Because if you are going to make recommendations about patrolling, it has to be to the organization itself. And I think, like I said, you needed to focus on the two areas and strengthen them. That there is a management part, and then there is the crime part, the discussions about understanding about the occurrence of crime. Thank you. Prof, I cut you short while you are saying something, almost closing the meeting.
No, I was trying to assist you.
Thanks a lot.
While you are away. But I see an interesting comment in the chat, Daktari.
Yeah.
You may wish to raise it. The last one.
You could read it, please, for me. I'm trying to get there. Something is slow here.
Okay. Somebody is saying that the study is sensitive. And Henk, how did you report this on your findings? Bearing in mind that no officer may want to be wrongly associated with weak patrol efforts or laxity at work or the criminal nature of it. Any comments, Henk, on that?
Yes, I've two approaches. The first thing is that I followed the protocol of informed consent. So each interview with each ranger had an introduction in which I said, I'm interested in poaching and not in poachers. And what you're going to tell me is confidential and will only be reported in an aggregated form. So for the ranger forms as a total. And that was very important. And I said, and you don't have to participate in this interview. It is entirely voluntary. And what helped a lot is that I walked around with them. I worked with them for all that time, so that was very good. And the other thing I did is I reported to the government, to the management of the site, and I said, this is more or less what I found. But of course, I can't mention any names. And the only thing I told them is this is the majority. The majority thinks they're underpaid. The majority thinks that they should have arms. Or nobody has predicted there would be snares right next to ranger posts. And that worked out really well. That didn't create any problems so far.
So you'll be reporting in your thesis in terms of the respondents, yeah? 60% of the respondents from a category.
Yeah. Exactly like the graphs you saw, Prof. So there is no names, there is no subdivision in night shift or day shift or that area of the conservancy. It is only, it's completely aggregated.
Yeah, thank you very much. That answers that particular question.
Thank you, Prof. As I see, most likely, Prof, we might be coming to the end. We were at 1.41 now. We are 10 less. What do you think?
I think, yes, I think unless there is a question, I think we can come to a close of the webinar. Is there any burning question to
as we wind up,
yes.
Henk, I wanted to pick this that was raised by the discussant about the footprint, how the bushmeat moves from the snare to the dining table, and the patrolling element. If you can use your patrolling element to see, is patrolling only within, but also without the conservancy. You can, I think that would add some little value to if there is any patrolling that happens outside the boundaries of the conservancy.
The thing here was that the management plan of KWS and the National Museums, they foresaw the installation of ranger posts outside the conservancy in the former Kikope Ranch, where they found that there was a lot of environmental destruction going on. And then that ranch was suddenly sold and parceled and developed as holiday homes. And what happened then is that they just wrote it out of the management report. So they sent a new management report to UNESCO and said, this conservancy doesn't exist anymore. It is now in a transition zone. And they removed everything in objectives about it. And basically there is no more reporting outside that conservancy other than 3 KWS rangers with not enough diesel. So, and they concentrate a lot on charcoal burning and that sort of thing. They don't really arrest people. They're not enough of them.
Well, thanks. The last is from Abi Kasoma, who says it is an interesting study. Well done. Thank you very much. I think with that, we may bring this meeting to a closure. I return it to the director, Professor David Mugai, for closure.
Thank you very much, Tomo. I would like to ask Professor Mugai if we have some closing remarks. Prof. Mudama?
Yes. Thank you, Prof. I think on my side, a bit.
Some mics are on.
Dr. Chiemo has to mute his. Yes, he's muted his phone.
Yes, Prof. Mudama.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank each one of us, of course, starting with the Henk, for a very engaging afternoon. Thank you for the comments that have been raised to Henk for the work. There are questions related to the extant literature that could be enriched, work that has already been done. There are conceptual issues. There are data and methodological issues that could be considered, and probably an additional way of interpretation of the results given. I believe these are issues that will make the work rich. And I am happy to note that the session is being reported. So in addition to the comments that Henk and Rhoda and the others and Trop have collected, I believe we will not be able to miss anything because the recording will really provide what we need. So this is really useful to the process, and I am grateful. So back to the director. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Mudama. Mine is to thank everybody, starting with Henk for a very informative webinar that he has given us this afternoon. Thank you very much. I also would like to thank the discussant. He made very good comments, which I believe will help Henk to improve the thesis. I want to thank Dr. Chiemo for moderating this afternoon's session. And I want to thank all the participants for your kind attendance and also for raising a number of issues of clarification, suggestions, and so on and so forth. I'm happy to note that we had 50+ attendance to today's webinar. And I would like to request our partners, our friends, our colleagues to continue attending our seminars. The feedback that you give is very, very useful for the presenters. So thank you very much. We'll put more in the pipeline and we will let you know. Have a very good evening and bye-bye for now. We didn't start with a prayer, but there's no reason why we cannot end with a prayer, Professor Mudama.
Okay, we can let's pray. Our Father and our God, once more we are grateful. Yet again, you have enabled the webinar to be successful. Thank you for helping us to interact at intellectual level, at research level, for the benefit of humanity and for the benefit of conservation. We want to commit each one of us to your hands. Even the ideas that have been generated, for those who are looking for research ideas, help them to grow, King of Glory. Father, we also want to commit the remaining work of Henk to your hands, that you'll also grant him success. Dismiss us with your love and your grace as we continue praying for your protection, even during this time of pandemic. It is in Jesus' name I pray.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you.
Amen.
Okay, goodbye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.